I mainly work in the video games industry. I've done work for BioWare, Electronic Arts, Valve, Bethesda, Riot Games, Curse Gaming, a whole bunch of fun game studios. And I make armor and guns, and most recently a lot of gaming trophies. So that's my full-time gig.
I'm Steven Meisner. I run Solo Roboto Industries. I'm based out of Los Angeles, California. Sorry, I'm stealing your coffee. I've been doing this full-time for, it'll be coming up on 3 years this year, and professionally making it a large part of my money for, I think, almost 6. I'm really bad at dates, but 5 or 6 years now. And I do mostly comic book stuff. My career is mostly based on making props for cosplayers, although lately it's been a lot more collectors. And I've started making, well, this year I've made some awards for a couple of cosplay contests. But a handful of corporate stuff, but mostly for individual people.
Really quick, is everybody cool if we don't use the mics? Is that all right? Can people hear us? Okay, using a microphone makes me feel super pretentious, so I just prefer this to seem more like a conversation. Okay, so I'm going to try and kind of cue up my presentation here, and I am going to hold my laptop in the air, as really just janky as that seems. So I have a thing I like to go through. Normally I do this panel by myself, but I've got Steven here. Steven and I, the nice thing about having another prop maker is that they can chime in on the things that they do that I might skip. So if I come up and say something incorrect, he's going to say it's wrong, and you guys all get to laugh at us. So back when I first started, one of the things I've done, well, hang on, really quick. Who here has attempted to build or builds props currently? I see people in the audience with stuff. Okay, cool.
Good, nice.
So one of the first things I ever made, if anybody's ever played Zelda, was the Hylian shield. Okay, all right, yeah, one fan, cool. Before I really considered this to be like, you know, millimeter precision or really paying attention to what I was doing, I was just slapping stuff together for Halloween. And I just kind of, I had a printed picture, and I didn't take any measurements. I just sort of started kind of carving along, and I'm not good at that. And after 7 years, I'm still not good at that. So one of the best things that I've learned is to do proper blueprints, okay? So this is what I do now, and you can see once you kind of lay out blueprints, how far off I was in my visual estimation. Pretty much all the dimensions were wrong, and all the shapes were wrong, and it's only a Hylian shield in rough appearance only. This is the one thing that I would really recommend that absolutely everybody take a few minutes. There's a lot of people out there, I actually post all of my blueprints, but there's a lot of people out there that show this kind of reference and show this kind of detail and 2D orthographic, 3D kind of stuff. And it really goes a long way towards making the entire rest of your build a lot less complicated and a lot less guesswork.
I have only just started doing that. We've had this conversation a couple times this weekend. I eyeball everything. Harrison was giving me crap the other day because I don't own calipers that are connected to a ruler. I have calipers, but they have no numbers. I only own 2 rulers in my whole house. And that's usually the way I like to do stuff, although recently like I built a Star-Lord helmet this past year that I started out that I thought I could do that with, and I had to restart it, I think 6 times, because I kept running into things along the way where symmetry was off or numbers were off, whereas if I'd actually just sat down and spent, you know, however long it took me to make a blueprint, even though I'm slow at it and I wouldn't be comfortable, I probably would have saved myself about a month worth of time. So I completely agree. It might seem, if it's not your thing, you're not comfortable with, or it's new to you, learn. It will save you so much more time and headache down the road if you just learn to make a blueprint first.
Or steal someone else's blueprints and print them full size. I don't know, I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk about. Any particular topics you want to hit on? Or?
No, I think we're just kind of going to go over some basic technique stuff.
Okay. There's a few tips and tricks that I've learned over the years that really save a lot of headache. Anybody here ever try and make something very symmetrical machine, like a rifle or a gun or something along those lines? Anything that's got mirrored symmetry to left and right? This is going to seem kind of simplistic, but if you have to cut a bunch of little tiny stuff like this, doing it all at once by taping both sides together is a great trick.
Yeah.
He probably did that with his Star-Lord stuff.
Yeah, it's the first time I actually got to do that.
Yeah, measuring and this is by the way how I sculpt everything. I have dial calipers, I've got little trammel points and needles and that kind of stuff. That's because I'm a bad sculptor. But you can use stuff like this, like a simple compass kit, drafting tools, you know, math, sculpting through math to really help out. If you are a little bit more organically minded like he is, you can get away with that. But for the rest of us who are not, I've found that tools like this, Does anybody know what this thing is? It's called a contour gauge.
I finally got one of those.
It's a really neat little thing. It looks like a comb. Basically, you press it over a shape. It creates the profile of that shape. If you flip it over to the other side of whatever it is you're sculpting, make sure that they're mirror symmetry from part to part. You can get those at Home Depot. They're like $6.
Yeah.
So we got a bunch of, I've got a bunch of stuff in here about material selection, build process. This is a piece that I built very recently. Again, I'm sorry I'm having to do this. This is really silly. But this is a piece, and also I'm like, I just bought this laptop. So this is a piece I built recently. It's Sophidia's Shield from the Soul Calibur series. And a lot of people, when they see something like this, they think of it as one big chunk, like one big element. And I see a lot of people take something like this, get a big wad of clay or a big brick of foam, and just try and shave everything down until I eventually have all those pieces. Now, there are people out there like him who can do that, and I can't. So I kind of cheat when it comes to this stuff. So if you look back at this, there's this sort of stepped edge along the perimeter, right? And there's a big dome in the center. So all of that, this is just a system of little MDF rings stacked on top of each other. And instead of trying to carve all of those perfectly, I made each one individually, and they're all the same height, so they were all already, set out for me. And then the other pieces, like that big dome in the center, those little elk horns, that's what they're called, those were all sculpted individually, separately, and then they were all kind of glued back together. By making things in different parts like this, you can simplify a process. Don't try and carve an entire gun out of a brick of foam. It's easier to just build the trigger, and then build the slide, and then build the hand, and put them all together later.
Yeah. Even for stuff that, like, we do a lot of molding and casting, which means we take something that's our master, make a mold of it, and then pour it out of some sort of resin, plastic, or other material. Even a lot of that stuff starts out as a compilation of lots of little parts. And you can take all those little parts that you've built, it was a lot easier to make them each separately, assemble them together, and then when you mold it and cast it, you get one solid thing that is those shapes all as one shape. Which is, again, it's way easier than trying to just like do it all as one go, because sometimes you just can't.
Yeah, I want to show these two slides, but this is going to be even harder to see at a distance, because there are 4 photos on this tiny little thing. The point, God, I wish I had a projector. I'm sorry. Again, this thing right here, this is somebody was making a set of pistols, and these are called Scarborough Ferrets from a game called Bayonetta, if anybody's familiar with that. The person who built this, I'm not slamming on anybody's work here, but the person who built this was somebody on DeviantArt, and they used materials that they're familiar with. There's pink insulation foam, there's some foam board in here, there's a material called epoxy sculpt. The problem was they were selecting things that weren't really correct to the end product, right? This is going to sound really rudimentary and dumb, but if you're going to make like something with broad flat shapes, you would use material that naturally comes as a broad flat shape. But it's really surprising how many people try and make like a sword blade out of clay, and try and make the entire thing nice and smooth and even with this lumpy substance that doesn't come in a big smooth brick. So this person did the same thing. They chose pink foam, and they cut that into sheets and tried to sand the pink foam back down flat. So they started with something flat, made it lumpy, and then tried to make it flat again. And you're fighting against the inherent properties of the material when it comes to that. This is another person, also on DeviantArt, same project, but they chose different materials. All of the sort of white parts on that is a material called Sintra, which is expanded PVC foam. It's very light, pretty cheap, and it comes in flat, thin sheets. So they built boxes, stuck dowel rods in there, and saved themselves a ton of work. So again, it sounds rudimentary, but the first projects I did were totally wrong. Trying to take clay and Bondo and make them smooth and even and perfect, and I was fighting against the natural properties of the materials.
Yeah, I started out, most of the stuff that I made originally was cardboard covered in something else. Bondo or epoxy sculpt or something like that. So you get a rough shape out of cardboard. And like one project like that, kind of like the Bayonetta ones, I made a gun blade from Final Fantasy VIII. And that instead of like sculpting the whole thing, I did it exactly like Harrison was just saying. I figured out which pieces were just flat, because a lot of it's just flat cut out. And I just layered up sheets of acrylic, which is just a flat plastic, cut out the basic shapes. Found PVC pipe that I needed in the right diameter and glued that on top of the barrel, and just layered the pieces until I got the shapes that I needed, so everything stayed symmetrical and flat, and I didn't have to fight stuff along the way. There wasn't a whole lot of sanding involved. It was just sort of machine it all together once it was done.
Who here has ever worked with Bondo? Anybody who here hates working with Bondo? Pretty much all the same people. Bondo is a 2-part spot putty. It's polyester resin. It's really nasty. It smells terrible. It's highly toxic. And it's really cheap, which is why a lot of us use it. And a lot of people are really frustrated because when you sort of smear it on stuff, it turns into kind of like a brick, and it's really hard to sand. And so one thing I like to talk about in these panels is how to work with Bondo properly, because it seems like everybody who tries to work with it gets really frustrated and ends up abandoning that
There's a
project.
handful of easy things that'll make it way easier for using it.
Yeah, so this right here is a helmet sculpt I was doing, a very early stage of a helmet sculpt. And at this point, it's just a gigantic brick of Bondo. And a lot of people go through this stage and they try and do everything all at once, try and get the full shape done. The trick when you're working with pretty much any kind of clay is to go in thin passes. This goes with sculpting with oil clay, water clay. Bondo is sort of a clay. Only add on just enough to get that small patch that you're working with finished. You know, I don't have everything up here on the visor. You can kind of see where this is going. This is after a bunch of sanding, and if I had this up on a projector, you could see the large scouring marks. But I was using a really heavy grit sandpaper at this point in time, something like, first off, do people understand what grit in sandpaper is? Lower number, rougher grit. Basically, something around 60 is going to feel like a roofing shingle. Higher number, smoother grit, something like 2000 is going to feel like a paper shopping bag. Make sense? Okay. If you're ever doing rough sculpting like this, you want to use the really low numbers to just sort of move away a lot of material very quickly. Then as you get further and further on, when you're starting to smooth things out, you've got the shape defined and you just want to smooth it out and make it perfect, then you go up to stuff like 220, 320, and then eventually you get to something like this and you jump into the stuff with lots and lots of numbers of zeros at the end. So 2000, 3500, that kind of thing. Don't try and do that in your first pass. It's all about refinement. Thin passes, gradually getting the shape to come out. Say something more than yes. I'm not carrying all of this.
Pretty well. Bondo, again, if you work a lot with Bondo, I actually started writing a book on this that is nearly done. Bondo, again, like you don't try and do everything at once, like Erickson just said. Work in sheets, and basically you want to put on just a little bit more than you need, and then sand it back down real quick. What most people do is they go, oh, I need a little bit more there, and they pile some more on. And I need a little bit more there, and they pile some more on. And after half an hour, they have this weird, like, Stegosaurus-looking lumpy thing, and then they spend 4 days trying to make it small again. Whereas if you just put on a little bit, take it down, put on a little bit, take it down, you'll use way less, you'll have fewer air pockets that you're trying to fill up again later, you'll have way less headache, your arms won't hurt as much, and you won't have as much mess. Like Harrison's, that Daft Punk helmet there, the Ant-Man helmet that I have downstairs at my booth, as well as the Star-Lord helmet that I made. Star-Lord is 90% Bondo. I would not recommend doing it that way. It was a terrible, terrible idea. But again, it was all Bondo. Just put on in like a little bit here, a little bit there, take it back down, build it up, keep refining the shape, piece by piece by piece.
Well, if you want to see any of Steve's work, he's got a booth downstairs. I do not. Unfortunately, because the last time I tried to bring anything with me, the TSA destroyed it.
I wear all my helmets on the plane. I actually literally like, and this time flying out, we didn't have the little like underseat space, so we couldn't put our helmets under the seat in front of us. My girlfriend and I flew out, so they made us wear them during takeoff and landing. So she had to wear Ant-Man and I wore Star-Lord.
That's the legitimate thing, 'cause I saw your photo on Facebook.
Oh yeah,
okay.
that was like, actually they made us put the helmets on because they wouldn't let them hold us. You can't have anything in your lap.
So it's completely safe to take off with covering your head in resin.
Can't see, just covered in like brittle plastic, way safer than just having it on the ground. So much safer.
Definitely. I'm looking up a different presentation right now. Hang on one sec.
Yeah. One of the things that, because this is intro to props, one of the things I do want to say is we're going to talk about a number of different ways to do things. There are obviously easier ways and harder ways to do almost anything, but one of the things that I always like to sort of hammer home in this stuff is that it is entirely possible to make nearly anything out of nearly anything else. That doesn't mean that any way is equally easy or smart. Like I just said, I told you how I made Star-Lord out of Bondo. I would never do that again. That was a bad idea. But I did it, and it looks good. That's it. You can make, like my first props, my first prop was Spartan armor from the movie 300. And that is made out of shipping boxes and oatmeal containers.
And abdominal muscles.
And epoxy sculpt. Those three things.
Right.
And that's it. It's cardboard covered in epoxy sculpt. And I have worn that costume for 8 years now. It's been to roughly 3 dozen cons. I've had to repair it once, It's got one little crack here that I glued back together and one little chip off the back, and it's lasted forever. And it's basically cardboard covered in clay, because I had no idea what I was doing, and it worked.
I feel like we should do a little bit of Q&A because it's hard for me to do the presentation and hold it up because a lot of this stuff is stuff I like to point at in a big screen and that might not work.
Yeah.
I will try and pull up some visuals and do this whole thing, but is there anything specific you guys are interested in learning about?
Or, like, we have props, what would you recommend for a prop first aid kit? You know what I mean?
Oh, like repair stuff?
Yeah.
Like, I know we tend to bring super glue, duct tape or gaff tape, electrical tape, and then a handful of paint pens. I usually bring like black and like some rub and buff, because rub and buff goes on everything.
There's a material I use, and it's like it's a really fantastic glue, but it's cripplingly expensive, unfortunately, but it glues everything together. All right, you have to get a very specific 3M glue gun to use it. It's called methacrylate. It's 2 parts, and it will chemically fuse dissimilar plastics together. So you can fuse ABS to styrene or PET to acrylic, and the glue itself acts as a chemical bonding agent. I bring that with me to every convention everywhere because it will melt things together. Now, methacrylate. Specifically, the brand I use is called Plexus, P-L-E-X-U-S, MA300. And I know that when you get into like the really special effects stuff, they drop the fun names. You don't go by like Smoothcast, Onyx. You get like a string of alphabet soup, but MA300 is my favorite glue. And man, that's a boring thing to talk about, but it will really revolutionize like the way you work and build this stuff. Yes? Little man.
What kind of training or skill did you have to do this?
Okay, question little guy had was what kind of training or skill did we have?
We got into this from totally different backgrounds.
Yes.
I said school.
School.
School? You want to take that first?
Sure. I actually have a degree in graphic design, which I don't think contributes at all to what I do. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. I gave them a whole lot of money. I got a degree in graphic design, and I worked in advertising and marketing for 7.5 years. And I did PowerPoint presentations for pharmaceutical companies. Now, while I was there, I did my minor in furniture design, which was good. That taught me how to use big, dangerous woodworking machinery, like bandsaws, lathes, drill presses, that kind of thing. If you're looking for something that will lead into this, specifically you should probably into middle and grade school, because I'm guessing you're not in college yet, probably look for like wood shop, and then if you're still interested in this in 10 years, probably go into industrial or product design. There are some schools on the West Coast that teach special effects classes, but personally I don't have any formal training in this kind of thing.
Yeah. I have a bachelor's in philosophy. And my dad was a house painter. And that's all I've got. Everything else I learned from watching people like Harrison online, like reading a lot on the internet. I learned how to do everything I know about like casting and mold making, watching the videos by the companies that make this stuff, specifically Smooth On. They have this amazing series of totally like 80s-tastic VHS instructional videos.
Oh, they're terrible. If you ever watch them, they have subtitles, just mute it. The music they pick for the back is just apocalyptic.
It's like they have the blue background, and it's like that that's like that sort of like that VHS music that like comes in and out really badly. But they're super instructional.
Yeah, like that horrible
but it's
stuff.
it's super bare bones, and they give you just what you need to know to do it. They have some of the most straightforward videos if you want to learn how to do that stuff, and playing around with things. I guess the one thing I did have growing up was I was allowed, whenever anything in our house broke, I was allowed to try and fix it.
I was the cause of things breaking.
So they didn't always work, but that's where I got a lot of experience just sort of poking at stuff. So.
Could you repeat the name of that video series again?
The company is called Smooth On.
They make specifically casting resins, mold making materials. The stuff that we use is silicone for molds and then urethane resin for castings. The nice thing is for every single product they have on their website, they have a series of step-by-step photo tutorials and then a video tutorial that teaches you how to use it, which is great because some of this stuff's $100 a gallon.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So
When you guys are working with, like you said, something like Fonda that maybe is like toxic, or even like when you're in a finishing stage and you're putting like some kind of top coat on?
Wear a respirator.
I was gonna say, yeah, like, do you guys recommend wearing a full respirator?
Ab-
I have people who just wear one of those little like dust masks and they're like.
I recommend an actual respirator for a couple of reasons. One, the paper ones don't filter out gases.
Right.
So if you're dealing with Bondo or fiberglass, it's not gonna cut out the smell that's actually bad for you. And just cost-wise, for most of you guys, like, we're using a respirator basically every day.
Yeah.
So like, I'm changing out, how often do you get new cartridges?
Month.
Yeah, like every 3 to 4 weeks, somewhere in there, depending on what I've been using it for.
There-
And those paper ones, you're gonna go through like 1 or 2 a day, and they're still a couple bucks. That respirator, you can buy one at Home Depot, the basic paint ones, for like $20, $25, and it'll last you 6 months to a year.
And I think that's a really good point. And I actually have that in my presentation. A little safety slide because I think it's really necessary to tell people about that. There's, I'll get you in a second, I see your hand up. There's 2 types of respirators. There's particle and chemical. And then there's, I'm sorry, if we're getting technical, there's 3, because there's the third one that does both, right? The chemical and the both have activated charcoal filters in them, and those will actually pull contaminants out that are smaller than air particles before you breathe them in. Particle filters are also important, so you shouldn't just get a chemical respirator, because anything that's larger than the alveoli in your lungs will not exit your lungs, enter your bloodstream, and get filtered out by the rest of the organs in your body. You will end up with diminished lung capacity forever. So if you
we're talking
breathe
something
in
like Bondo dust.
sanding dust, you know,
Sanding
just
dust.
general wood chips, that kind of stuff, that's just there permanently. A really, really good respirator is about $50, and I think a lung transplant is a couple million. So if you're going through the money, it's uncomfortable, it's hot, but it's really worth it.
Yeah, same thing for safety glasses. My personal favorite, like we have a friend who literally lost an eye
Yeah,
making props.
safety glasses would not have helped him.
Unfortunately, no. But if you're doing anything like basically anytime I use a power tool that moves faster than my own hands, I put on safety glasses. Dremels, power sanding, drill press, anything with a saw blade, I put on safety glasses. They're $1. My favorite ones are the big, cheap, boxy ones. I find those to be the most comfortable, and they will keep crap out of your eyes, which is really important.
And you can get prescription ones too. My healthcare plan covers that, which I found really cool. So yeah, you
I
had a
don't
question?
have vision, so I have to wear.
Yeah, what would you do if, say, if you were to have like some type of, like if you will build like some type of morpher or some type of belt, like Kamen Rider or Power Rangers?
Like flexible belt stuff like that? Is that what you're asking for?
Or like a wristwatch or something like that, like Ben 10 or something, how would you build like a prop like that?
Something that needs to like fit around like a limb or something that's got to be bendy and move.
Yeah, he's got a great story about what he did with a couple of. Anybody here familiar with Venture Brothers?
Yes.
The Monarch from Venture Brothers.
I do that costume.
He has permanent nerve damage because
I
of how he
can't.
did
I have
something.
about 60% feeling on half of both of my thumbs because of those bracers, because they're rigid and they just happen to sit right on the blood there. And they put my thumbs to sleep, and only half of it ever came back.
So he made it out of really heavy, rigid materials.
Yeah, the
at
second one's
first.
actually really lightweight, but still rigid. The ones I have now are foam, so they bend, so I don't have that problem.
I'm gonna see if I can pull up. Keep going.
But stuff like that, there's a number of ways you can go about stuff like that. EVA foam is one easy way. Our friend Bill Durant, Punished Props,
Literally wrote the book.
quite literally wrote the book. I have, I've got a couple downstairs actually. He wrote a book on foam called this Foam Smith, and because foam is bendable and you can still paint it and stuff, you can make flexible, bendy props.
This is some armor I made from a video game series called Mass Effect. And if anybody's familiar with, okay, is anybody, like, if you go to a Harbor Freight, I don't know if they have this up here. Okay, cool. The foam floor mats that you put down, the anti-fatigue mats that are like, they lock together, people make armor out of that stuff all the time. And our friend Bill Duran at Punished Props, he has a set of books that go about how to build this stuff out of that material. It's super cheap. You get 4 sheets that are 24 by 24, about $16. And you can cut this with a hobby knife, glue it together with hot glue, shape it with a heat gun. It's really cheap. It's very lightweight, which is good for like belts and wristwatches and that kind of stuff. And it's easy to paint. I made a full suit of armor out of it. And it's very durable too. So if you're walking around or you take something off at the end of the day and you drop it, or somebody bumps into you at a convention, it's not going to get damaged, which is really nice.
Yeah, and again, even if it does, it's so cheap. Again, like you get 16 square feet for like, $10 to $15. that if you ding it up or whatever, it's easy enough to just remake pieces of it.
Like, can you get Home Depot or?
Home Depot and places like that, they don't necessarily sell the locking ones, but any of those foam floor mats, you can buy them in rolls. I know the Home Depot by me sells these like 2 by 4 foot rolls.
Yeah,
that
they've
go
got like
down.
a diamond plate pattern on them.
Yeah, and craft foam is almost the same material, it's just thinner. And you can buy craft foam at places like Michael's or Joann's in 1/4-inch sheets. It's the same sort of stuff.
Yeah, dude, little guy again.
Oh, I have 2 questions. What was that called again?
The foam,
Yeah.
it's called EVA.
Oh, and
Ava,
also,
yeah.
what kind of paint do you use in the pizza?
There are a bunch of different ways to paint it. A lot of people, getting a little deeper into this, it's porous, right? Which means it will absorb paint when you spray it on there. So in order to get something that's a nice even finish, you have to seal it first.
Yeah.
Which is basically a process of sealing up all those pores before you paint something on top of it and making it nice and smooth. Some people, yeah, what's up, man? Am I losing you?
There,
I'm getting there.
yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. You
It's
can
a tough audience. Okay, there's a paint called Plastidip, right? And that's it's really toxic, so you should wear a respirator.
Super toxic.
It's basically like shooting road tar out of a can, but it does seal things up really well. It's very flexible, so it flexes with the foam. Some people will paint foam with wood glue and use that to seal it. Some people, I use a special 2-part polyester paint, but that's a little bit like advanced level. That's HVLP gun stuff, and that's complicated and toxic. And
Yeah.
the Plastidip's really the best way to go. You can get it a bunch of really cool colors too, so you can get gold and silver, green, metallic,
Yeah,
all
they have
this
a
kind of
whole
stuff.
line of stuff now.
Yep.
That actually brings up a point that I would like to make about a lot of what we're going to talk about. You kind of have to make a balance of, would you rather spend your time doing it or your money? For example, like one way of you can seal foam with like Elmer's glue or wood glue, but you have to do like half a dozen passes, and each one of those passes takes 30 minutes to an hour to dry, at least, before you can start putting any kind of paint on it. Plastidip, unless you're going for like really, really glossy, you can get away with 2 or 3, and you spray it on and you're done. Whereas the wood glue is brush it all out, let it dry, brush it all out. The wood glue is obviously a lot cheaper because you can buy a gallon of Elmer's glue for I think $8. But it's going to take you a long time. Plastidip is like $9 or $10 a can, but it's quick. And a lot of prop stuff is just like that, where it's pick one that you want to spend. You have time or you have money, and you can go either way.
So this thing right here, this piece was made out of that foam as well. So the whole thing, the really nice stuff about this foam is it's super light.
Yeah, it weighs
So
nothing.
that hammer is about 5 feet tall and it weighs 3 pounds, which is really great for a convention for anybody who's ever made a prop out of wood and walked around with like a 20-pound gun the whole day. And like you pick it up once, you're like, that's not so bad. And then by the end of the day, you want to throw it in the garbage. These are great. They're durable. You can swing them around. You can set them on the floor. You don't have to worry about them getting dinged up. And they're super cheap to make and very lightweight.
Yeah.
There's basically almost no downsides with foam construction.
Yeah. If you've been by the marble booth downstairs with a set of wings on one side, I made those. Those are made out of floor mats.
My question, I actually really started looking at getting an airbrush. What would you recommend, like gravity fed versus bottle fed and then a frame?
Okay, it all depends on what you're doing. So his question was, if you're looking into airbrushing, which ones should you get first? There's two types of airbrushes that we can deal with. There's what's called a single action, which works like a spray paint can. You press down a nozzle and paint comes out, and that's it. And then there's a double action where you press down and that's air, and you pull back, and pulling back is the paint flow. So you can gradient that, right? And then within those two variants, there's one that has a big jug of paint on the bottom, one that has a small cup of paint on the top, right? For an intro one, I would recommend a single action siphon feed, which is the one with the bottle on the bottom, just to get you used to taking it apart, cleaning it. They're cheaper. If you don't need a super high-end professional one, I have a Badger that I use, single action, and I love it. It's great. I do 90% of my airbrushing with it. And if you're familiar with spray paint cans, it kind of bridges the gap from one to the other. So that's what I would do as an intro piece. Badger is a good brand, also Iwata, and Grex would be the 3 brands. It's like, whether you like Ford, Chevy, I won't say Chrysler because they don't count anymore, but whether you like Ford or Chevy, it's a personal taste. I'm sorry if there's any, Mopar guys in the audience, but they got bad when Fiat bought them. I'm a car guy.
What do you use for the airbrush? What do you use for the air? Do you, like,
There's
compressor?
small compressors.
Yeah, you can get a little airbrush compressor. You
Yeah.
can actually buy a lot of.
Constant one, or does it have like a?
Some run constantly, some have a tank. You can run it off a big one with a pressure, regulator. I spent all my money on the brushes. I've had the same $12 eBay compressor for 9 years that I had before I even got into props, and it still works. I've had to take it apart and replace the O-rings and seals like 3 times, but I haven't killed it yet, so.
And I have one that I actually got as a set on Amazon. It came with like a little single action airbrush and a little compressor, and it was like $60 for the whole set, and it works totally fine 90% of the time.
I'll get you next to.
Do you prefer the siphon feed, like giving the bottle rather than gravity fed?
If you are painting big things,
Uh-huh.
a siphon feed is better because you're going to have a big reservoir of paint. If you have a gravity-fed thing and you're trying to paint something like a chest plate, you're going to run out of paint after this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and you're going to get really sick of it by the time you get all the way over here.
So just
Yeah.
the better bet is if you're, just one to use for everything.
Right.
The siphon feed probably.
So for this piece right here, again, like all of the gradients that go around certain areas, that was all done with a gravity-fed little cup one because I only needed a small amount of paint. The big areas were all done with my single action. Yeah.
What kind of material would you recommend for making? Do you ever play Kingdom Hearts?
No, but I'm familiar with
I
it.
was going to say the Keyblades, and then there's the one character, Axel, who has chakrams, which are like the circles with the spheres on the end
Yep,
of them.
I have a friend of mine who
What
did
would you
that.
recommend to make with those? I see people use wood, but I feel like I wouldn't be good with using wood.
Again, you can make stuff out
It's
of
like
almost
out of
anything.
Yeah, that's why I said it's
Um,
easier. You recommend.
I'm a big fan of Sintra, like Eric was talking about earlier. It's a really, it's basically plastic sheeting, and it comes in different thicknesses, but the standard is sort of like 1/8. And it's porous on the inside, but it's really lightweight and it's really rigid and it's really easy to chop up and sand.
So all the black parts on that were made out of material called Sintra. The nice thing about Sintra is if anybody wants to get into to prop making and they don't want to spend any money, if you find a local sign shop, someplace that does convention signage or point of sale stuff, they usually have little scraps of this that they just throw away. It's PVC, and that's polyvinyl chloride. PVC is a very difficult material to recycle, so most places don't do recycling for PVC, so they just scrap it. And if you go to a sign shop, they'll usually have like a big bin of just junk, and they don't use anything that's smaller than, say, like 18 by 24. So you might find a sheet that's like 12 inches by 8 inches, and they'll just give it to you. I haven't paid for Sintra in 6 years, because there's a sign shop just down the street from me, and I walk in, they're like, "Hey, Harrison," they hand me a giant cardboard box. And so this is great because it's free. Problem is, once you find that sign shop, don't tell anyone else because they'll go steal all your materials. But anyway, it's dimensional, right? So if it's a 1/4 inch thick, it's a 1/4 inch thick all the way through. You can sand it down to a really smooth finish. You can use super glue or acetone to bond this to itself chemically.
Yeah.
And so it's not just glued together, it's one part.
Yeah,
which is
literally
really
welds.
nice. So, huh? Yeah, pretty much. Well, it's just going to go in the garbage anyway. So the fun thing is when I can charge companies for stuff I get for free. But yeah, Sintra's great. It's flat, but you can also heat it and do things like this around the backstock of that. Like on smaller pieces, it will take simple radius curves. So you can bend it around, get cool shapes out of it. It comes in a bunch of different colors. This is some armor plates I made out of it too for Claymore, which is an anime series.
Very
And
first
so,
Loki helmet ever made was all Sintra.
yeah. Yeah, he's got an example of a helmet he made downstairs. I don't know what that's from, but it's all Sintra as well.
How do you heat?
Oh yeah.
A heat gun works really well. Who asked that question? I want to make sure I'm looking at the right person. A heat gun works really well, but you can also, basically any source of even temperature heat, if you have, and this is again a little bit up from the intro to props thing, but you have a dedicated oven for plastic or that kind of thing, I'm actually getting just an old oven to stick in my shop. Because you should never heat this in an oven, this is very important, that you eat food out of. When it off-gases, it releases chlorine. And if you do that in an oven you eat food out of, that chlorine can get absorbed by the ceramic posts that insulate the heating coils in your oven. The next time you cook, it'll get let out and put in your food. So don't ever heat any of these materials in an
Plastic
apparatus
foam.
you are going to be eating out
You'll
of.
find lots of YouTube videos online of people making vacuum formers and using their oven. Don't do that. You'll slowly poison yourself to death.
I'm trying to find...
But you asked about a heat gun. A heat gun is one of those sort of standard tools if you're going to do any sort of shaping of things, and you can buy them at any hardware store. I have a Home Depot one that's lasted me, I think, the entire time I've had it. It was like $15. You can get them for 10 or 12 at Harbor Freight.
Okay, on that guy, this sculpture, or this piece right here, this is from a video game called League of Legends. Everything but the head on that shark is all Sintra. And so you'll notice they're all simple radius curves like a barrel, right? It's really hard to get Sintra to do a compound radius curve like a dome. That's because it's called a closed cell foam structure, so it'll only do arches. You can't really get it to do a cup. But yeah, it's great. And again, I didn't pay for any of that material on it, so that was really
If you
fun.
do have to, it's so
I'll get you
cheap. And again, you just slice it with a hobby knife, pop it.
I've used PVC pipe
Mhm.
for thicker things.
Yeah,
Cut it right down the middle, heat it up, it becomes a sheet,
yep.
and then you can use that.
PVC pipe and Sintra are chemically the same thing, so you can fuse them together too. So whenever you're using the same materials, so that's nice. Yeah, man.
I just want to know what types of materials that are cost efficient and very easy to use to do this.
The Ava foam, I would say, is one of the best.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that with the armor and that hammer that I showed, because you can get that in the foam floor mats. You can get it at craft stores like a Michaels or Joann's. You can get it in thinner sheets. They call it like fun foam or craft foam out there.
Does it have like a fake steel pattern on it or something?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
It's like puzzle pieces or something?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So they do a lot of, is that craft foam back there? Cool, well, we got a great example. So yeah, craft foam's super cheap to work with. You know, variety of glues work on it, variety of paints work on it. You can get some really cool effects out of it. Beyond that, if you're going for costume type pieces, well, I already extolled the virtues of free Sintra.
I know I'm a big foam because it's just so cheap and easy to work with. Sintra is probably one of the easiest, cheapest, most cost-effective plastics you can get. I'm still a huge fan of cardboard. I will extol cardboard until the day I die. Because I use cardboard for everything. I don't usually make finished stuff out of cardboard anymore, but I still pattern almost everything I do in cardboard.
As far as things that are easier to work with but a little bit on the moderately expensive side, there's two materials called Warbla and Wonderflex that are great. You probably heard about that if you're into costuming. Wonderflex is actually a low melt thermoplastic mixed with wood pulp fibers, so it's basically cardboard and hot glue formed into a sheet. But that means you can, it was originally made for sculpting like shoe lasts and that sort of thing, but you can shape it in all kinds of things, heat it up and build like breastplates and armor and that kind of stuff out of it. There's also Tandy Leather. I think they have a booth downstairs.
They do. I think they have some of the samples of the new
Yeah,
stuff.
Tandy Leather is a company, obviously they do leather working, but they've come out with another sort of costuming, cosplay, armor making stuff called,
I don't
save me
remember.
here.
I don't know.
Is it this?
Huh?
Is it this?
Yes, that's a Terraflex.
There
Thank
we
you
go.
very much.
I know it had an X in it. They always had
Oh,
an
cool.
Yeah,
They're
they have
gi-
like samples.
They're
up
giving out
there.
samples. It's good stuff.
And the coolest
Yeah,
thing
go grab a
about
bunch
this
of
stuff,
samples. Just make your armor out of that.
the coolest
Come
thing
back with
about
a
this
fake
stuff,
nose.
the Wonderflex, the Warbla, any of those like thermoplastics, is it's sort of like vacuum forming if you've ever looked that up. But you can reheat it and reshape it again. So as you screw up, you can keep working with it.
Yeah.
I know, like, I've got one set of armor made out of Wonderflex. The downside to it is because it has that low melting temperature where you can actually work with it. It means that if you get it too hot again, it will warp. Like my
Good.
Monarch armor died because it sat in the car too long.
Yeah.
So I had this permanent ripple where it just sat in the sun for an hour and got too hot.
Dude in the striped shirt? Yeah.
Question, so you get the picture of fish bone.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know like Draven's blade.
Yep.
How it spins.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions on making that and attaching it to the blade?
Because it spins from a hub in the center, right?
Right.
Yeah, that would be. Whew, that's a fun one.
How big is it?
About that big.
It's like
You can buy PC case fans. Come in those sizes, and I know if you look for like high-end case modding stuff, like PC modding, they make ones that are now magnet-driven around the outside, and those are DC powered. They run off 12 volts, which means you get power off battery. So if you could find one in the right size, you could kind of cheat that.
I would use a ring bearing personally. It's basically a giant ring, and then all the bearings are on the outside. It's got a mounting flange on the outside and the inside, so the center hub is empty, and you can put that post in there. He kind of like spins them around.
Oh,
It's
is that what it is?
video game physics?
Gotcha,
Of course,
okay.
it's not. If you want to chat a little bit more about it afterwards, I can talk to you. But yeah, just meet me outside. I've got some ideas for you. Cool.
Outside of things like vinyl, what's a good substitute for leather?
For leather, well, actually, I've seen some really good stuff. I hate to keep harping on the same material, but I've seen some good stuff with Ava foam.
Yeah.
If you can jot down a name, there's a guy who goes by Stephen K. Smith Props. It's SKS Props. I see a couple people nodding. They know his stuff. Stephen did a piece recently from Dragon Age Inquisition that's got all this plate metal armor with all of these leather pads underneath it. He made this really amazing, like, thick belt that's got all this quilting and stitching, all foam. Every single thing on it's the same material, and just by, he actually used a heat gun and a soldering iron to draw lines to make it look like they were quilted lines in the foam, and then stitched on top of it. So it's lighter, cheaper, and you can simulate the effect with paint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stitch right there with needle and thread?
I beg your pardon?
He stitched through it with needle and thread?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, I think he actually used a really thick,
This is like twine, right?
like a quilting needle and hemp to do it, because it was a really heavy, I mean, it's video game stuff, so it's really kind of accented and
I think
cartoony.
he used his hot knife to like sort of poke the holes.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't tear.
Yes.
And then just, sewed through the holes that he made.
Yep.
A good source of